Okay, so we're really delighted to have you here. We're not so delighted about what's going on in our country. So I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping first. We're going to have 4 speakers, and then we'll have questions afterwards. If you want to ask a question, down at the bottom in that ribbon of choices, there's one where you can ask a question, a Q&A. It has a question mark on it. So if you put the questions in there, we'll be monitoring that. And when it comes time to ask the speakers questions, that's where we'll start. My name's Martha Weaver. I'm on the steering committee for our local Indivisible. I'm involved in a group that's been trying to recognize and promote the friendship between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And we had people working that live along the Mexican border and people who live along the Canadian border. For people who don't live along the border, you may not be aware that there are peace gardens on both borders. And those peace gardens are on either side of the border, so that people from Canada, for instance, and people from the US can both enter the garden without going through customs, and they can intermingle. At least in the past, that's the way it's happened. There's a peace garden in Southern California that was dedicated when Richard Nixon was president. His wife came and did the dedication, and one of the things she did was through the middle of that garden ran barbed wire. She had the Border Patrol cut that wire so that she could step across into Mexico. And she said that she hoped eventually there would be no barrier between the United States and Mexico. One of the people that was working on that project, she's still working along the Mexican border, but she's no longer working on the project along the Canadian border. She said that right now she thought there were bigger threats to California's sovereignty than to Canada and Mexico. She's really concerned about martial law in California. And she sent us all a message in which she dropped out of working with us. And what she said was, she says, I'm in California, and right now there are bigger threats to California than to Canada and Mexico. I fear I am going to die this year because of Donald Trump. If you don't hear from me again, I just want to say thank you. It was nice meeting you on the calls I've been on. Good luck to all of you. So I think there's a lot of emotion around what's happening now, and it's not only is it all right to experience that emotion, it's a good thing. It helps us all interact with what's happening. So with that said, we have 4 speakers today, and our first speaker is going to be Dave Troy. Dave is a tech entrepreneur and an investigative journalist focused on threats to democracy. He has studied disinformation since the earliest days of the internet. His work is available at davidtroy.com and on a number of podcast platforms. David's going to set the broader context for what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so thank you, Martha, for having me here today. And it's so great to see everybody coming in such wonderful numbers, and also to know that there's so many great peaceful protests happening all around the United States today. So I'm excited to be a part of that and to get to talk with you today about some of the ideas that I've been exploring over the last 10, 15 years or so. And as Martha said, I'm an investigative journalist. I got into that mode because of studying disinformation and social media data on the internet, trying to understand how it's affecting our society and connecting it to a broader study of history. So today what I'd like to do is to share with you some observations that I have gleaned from doing this work over the course of these last several years. And I'm going to go ahead and share a slide on the other desktop here, so if you'll bear with me a moment. Okay, can you all see that? Martha, does that show up for you?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so I think, a good place to start is with the idea that democracy was somehow or another going to spread on its own. And if you think back to when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, a lot of people felt like that this was the end of the Cold War and that authoritarianism had, lost in the form of the Soviet Union, and that somehow or another democracy was just going to take hold magically. And what we've seen over the last 35 years is that simply didn't happen. In fact, democracy is in the decline right now, and there's fewer democracies in the world at this point, particularly over the last 10, 15 years. And the democracies that do exist, such as those in the United States and several in Europe, are now considered to be threatened democracies or low-functioning democracies. So I think the first thing we need to kind of put into our heads is that we actually need a plan if we want democracy to succeed. And I have various work that I'm doing on that front, but we won't get into all of that right now. I think coupled with that idea is the notion that defending the status quo, or such as it was prior to this sort of authoritarian turn that we're taking, isn't sufficient, because I think a lot of people realize that there have been various problems with the status quo, not least of which is income inequality and various kinds of structural deficits in the United States that need to be addressed. And I think people are hungry for a better, clearer vision of the future that actually defends democratic values and also helps to advance some of these causes that we all see are problems. So towards that end, I think it's easy to sort of latch on to these top-level, top-down political fixes that sort of used to feel like the answers to the problem, but now we are called to a higher level of engagement and really to start to build networks and resilience in our own communities. And I want to be specific about the idea of community, that I don't necessarily mean in your neighborhood, physically, geographically, where you live. I could be talking about professional networks that you're a part of, or within your companies, or amongst a special interest group that may exist across the world. But all of us, each of us, participates in various communities where we have social connections and ties that can be converted into actual action and forward motion. And I think we would all be well advised to help to build up that strength within our networks. So again, towards that end, looking towards emergent bottom-up solutions rather than top-down political fixes. This is going to take a long time. I think folks are rightly concerned about the fact that we are running out of time on a number of fronts, both in terms of democracy as well as climate and various other, urgent issues. On the other hand, this is going to take a while. So we need to kind of be prepared for a long haul approach where really the solutions come from the bottom up and from emergent phenomena rather than expecting quick top-down solutions. I think that there is a tendency to latch on to specific politicians or other talking heads or demagogues of some kind, and I think we should all exhibit a healthy degree of distrust of those folks, because I think it's all too easy for people to say, oh, you're interested in preserving democracy. Well, here's some other causes I think that are also tied to your cause, and you should fight for those things too. It's important that we all preserve our agency in this difficult time, and that we all preserve our capacity for evaluating and determining what our priorities actually are, and we shouldn't outsource that to anyone, and that includes me. Don't listen to me, think for yourself, but again, take what I'm saying into consideration. Again, the idea that this is going to take a while, I think most of us, whether we're 25, 55, 75, can expect to spend the rest of our lives dealing with this set of problems. And I think that it's healthy to settle into a kind of a long-term approach to this rather than, thinking that this is a sprint. It is very much a marathon, because at the end of the day, even if we manage to fight off some of these shorter-term threats, we have the long-term defense of democratic values to deal with for the long term. And I think it's super important that we all prepare ourselves for that long-term engagement. And no one but us is coming to save us. There isn't one person, there isn't one solution here. We need to be the solution. Another thing that I think is important is to try to focus on primary sources versus secondary sources. So television news, radio news tends to be less helpful than just reading documents yourself, or listening to something like C-SPAN, which tends to channel primary sources and covers congressional hearings and that sort of thing. The constant drumbeat of fear and bad news and everything else on cable television news in particular, it generates cortisol. It tends to put the mind into a reactive, fear-laden state, which tends to rob people of agency. And I think it's much more helpful to focus on seeking out primary sources. And, again, being a participant, not just a spectator, I think is super important because it helps to reinforce that sense of agency that, really gives you a sense of hope and clarity. When you wake up in the morning, you have a sense that you can actually do something because you are participating. And even if it's in just a small way, I think that's super important. In terms of how to participate, I think many people feel frustration and anxiety over the fact that they don't know what to do, and it's not clear always what to do. And I get that question a lot from people of, well, obviously things are terrible, but how do I respond? What can I do? And I want to point you to a practice that has been identified as effectuation. This is something that was coined by a researcher in entrepreneurship named Saras Sarasvati, who basically says that what entrepreneurs do is they look at who they are and what kind of resources they have access to, whether that's connections with people or ideas or what have you, and they take a step, they do something, they act. And then once they've acted, there is more to be done based on that, and you can continually grow your range of possibilities and your power and your agency. There we go. And increasing your agency as you go. So I think that that's a super effective way of dealing with hard problems from a standpoint of you don't really have a starting point. You don't know what to do. So I talk more about that in the article that's linked to the QR code that you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm, again, delighted to be here today, and I want to applaud everyone involved for taking steps and being a participant. Whether it's in person at a rally today or in a virtual event like this, and I think many people will be participating in both. I think that these are the right kinds of steps, and again, thank you for having me. If you'd like to see more about my work, the best website for that is at america2.news, as shown on the left-hand side of the screen there. So again, thank you, Martha, for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Dave. Okay, so our next speaker is Olga Lotman. She's a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Her research focuses on the cross-section of organized crime and intelligence operations in Russia and Ukraine and their impact on the West. Her work is available on Substack. I will say that everyone that did sign up for this and didn't just kind of wander into this meeting, I have your email and we will send out a after event email, and it'll have the links to all of our speakers. So Olga's going to compare Russia with the current US situation and also touch briefly on resistance strategies used by Ukraine. So Olga.
Martha, thank you so much for having me. And I am so happy to see so many people who are involved, in what is happening and, doing everything they can to preserve our democracy. So a little bit about myself. I have been involved with Russia and Ukraine for decades. I am Ukrainian and Russian and, worked on internal issues in both countries. And about a decade ago, I got involved in the United States when Trump came on the political stage. The reason I got involved was two reasons. One, I was watching Russia carry out the multifaceted attack on our elections at that time. And the second, the tactics that I was picking up from Trump. And then over the past decade, I've worked a lot on the US and have been trying to warn people that Trump has literally the same, tendencies and desires of installing a Russian style system, as Putin did when he consolidated power. And now he came back to power. Last time he attempted to do a lot of things, but luckily we had, some kind of guardrails. This time around, he made sure to remove these guardrails, and this is why it makes him so much more dangerous. So I just wanted to give a few comparisons of how the Russian system is and what is happening here. So I'll start with how Putin came to power. Um, the most important to know about Russia is that, the system is corrupt and cruel and goes back centuries. I mean, this is not a Putin specific problem, but I'll focus on him. When he came to power, he staged a series of terrorist attacks. The reason he did it was one, to have his name recognition as coming to save everyone. And so that was the main reason that he did it. And two, to create an enemy. Once he won the presidency, he came into power and he started using, expanding powers in order to deal with the quote unquote terrorist, from Chechnya, and to start the Second Chechen War. Now, there were many investigations that it was actually Russia's security services that Putin was part of that created, terrorist attacks and blew up apartment buildings that killed over 300 Russians, but he pinned it on the Chechens, and as a result started the Second Chechen War, and this, unleashed a whole set of emergency powers for him to, start consolidating power. Um, we see Trump doing the same thing. I mean, from a decade ago, the minute he came down, the Gordy escalator, he started attacking immigrants, talking about border invasions. Now he's expanded not only from immigrants and border invasions to now international students being a threat. And you see him invoke, I think the last time I checked, it was 8 emergency executive powers in order to expand his control. Um, After Putin came into power, the first thing he did was install his loyalists in all the key agencies and state companies. Here, the first thing, I think on day 2, that Trump came back to power, we saw him, begin purging out civil servants and installing his loyalists who have, no experience, no merit, but have just the loyalty so they can carry out orders, whether legal or illegal. And all his loyalists, for the most part, went into their positions by passing vetting and oversight. Um, Once Putin, got comfortable and had his loyalists in place, we saw that he started weaponizing the law enforcement and all agencies against his enemies. And here you see the same thing. I mean, you see Trump, basically every single agency right now is going after either universities, targeting journalists, immigrants, prosecutors, federal judges, politicians. And you see him doing literally the same exact thing, using our tax funded agencies to try to silence dissent and to smear his opposition, the Democratic Party. Um, and also, with that said, you see him specifically over the past month shifting to the Democratic Party. He's opened investigations into Act Blue, Indivisible, Media Matters. He's arrested a sitting congresswoman, handcuffed a U.S. senator, arrested judges. So you see the same pattern of him beginning to now crack down on the opposition party. Um, Russia has always had a police state. I mean, this goes back to the days of the Tsars. Um, but when Putin came into power with his loyalists, he really, really focused on quashing any kind of dissent and criminalizing any form of dissent, using the state police and various units to go after people. Here you see Trump doing the same thing. I mean, he's deputizing, regular people as ICE agents. Not these people aren't being vetted. Some of them have had criminal past, He's formalizing federalizing the National Guard. Um, you see him now increasing the use of active military battalions to do the same. He's using LA as a test case and now, threatening to expand to other cities. So this is something that we really need to push back on, monitor, call Congress, because this is not, what is supposed to happen in this country. Um, Another thing, Putin controlled the population through propaganda. And again, this is an old Soviet tactic, of putting out propaganda, disinformation, and making sure that every single, whether it's influencers or state media or propagandists on talk shows, that they're all in line with the same talking points of the day. Here you see Trump doing the same thing. He converted our White House website, again, taxpayer funded, and added a newswire section to it, which literally looks like Russia Today. And it's just pure propaganda, citing and linking articles from right-wing outlets. And at the same time, you see him sidelining independent press at the press briefings, whether Pentagon or the White House, and installing his influencers and right-wing outlets, giving them special access so then they can flood the zone with complete lies. And we just saw this with the arrest of a U.S. senator. We saw the video from every single angle, but then if you go into MAGA world, you see a complete different story, a complete different narrative. And he basically, continues to create two spheres of influence and solidify, his power over information. And then with Putin, and again, this goes back to Soviet leaders, but with Putin, he blurred the lines between state and criminal networks. You see Trump doing the same thing. I mean, he aligned himself openly with felons, extremists, insurrectionists, pardon the insurrectionist. As long as you're loyal to him, you're allowed to commit, crimes on his behalf. And this is the message he sent to all these mercenary and militia and criminal networks, that the key thing is loyalty. And as long as you carry out acts of violence on his behalf, you're fine. Meanwhile, he continues demonizing, peaceful protesters as if they're the threat and enemy of the people. And then the last thing that I'll focus, which is extremely important, is the surveillance aspect. Again, going back to Soviet days, I mean, surveillance is key to controlling the population and to looking for any signs of dissent and to quashing it before, it grows into a movement. Here, the first thing that Trump did was put Elon Musk with his, unauthorized, illegal, frankly, Doge operatives, and embedded them into every single agency. And from there, they started fusing this information together. So, they're creating basically very complete dossiers on all of us, which then they can use AI to spit out target lists, to profile, and then, as a means to silence opposition. So this is another key thing we need to push back. We need to, continue to have this, call our Congress, talk about it, write about it, and inform other people, because frankly, I don't think anyone on this call is comfortable with having some unvetted operatives, with access to your medical records, banking records, social security and whatnot. So this is what he's doing. We saw this playbook attempted in Ukraine. Ukrainians had two successful revolutions, and I'll focus on the most recent in 2013, 14, Maidan. Um, Literally was the same kind of, dictator Yanukovych, who was overreaching, using executive powers, trying to push Ukraine towards the sphere of influence under Russia, where Ukrainians have always considered themselves Europeans and have for decades tried to move towards Europe and towards the West. So he had crossed the line and betrayed the Ukrainian people in 2013. And as a result, you had, protest begin. And that was the Maidan Revolution, where regular Ukrainians made it their civil duty to show up every single day, working in shifts to protest. And they coordinated, networks across and built coalitions across every single town, village, city in Ukraine, in order to be able to mobilize people, immediately. So there are ways. They were very successful. Yanukovych ended up, fleeing to Russia in the dead of night. Ukrainians were able to, install a democratic president. And that's it. So we have many examples, that this can be stopped if we organize, if we coordinate, unite with each other, because there's more of us than them. So, this is not all over. This is why I'm still fighting for this country, because we have hope and we can, come together and turn this around. And seeing all the protests growing and the town halls growing and everything that I've seen, this gives me hope, because right now we're not in a campaign season for town halls to be over flooded, for streets to be over flooded. There are protests literally every week, if not every day now at this point. So this was, I wanted to let people know I've been writing about this, trying to warn people. I even started doing a class on authoritarianism 101 to show all the tactics and tackle each tactic and give resistance tools on how to push back against you know, each tactic, so we can stop this, because it will be stopped. I mean, like I said, I have faith in the American people, and we are stronger together, than Trump and his cronies. And that's it. Again, Martha, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for being on this call.
Thank you so much, Olga. So, okay. So our next speaker is Kina Bloom. She's worked in sales and in marketing. She was a sales manager who worked at Tesla for quite a number of years. So she's had an up close look at Elon Musk's management style. And her work's available on her YouTube channel. She's going to talk about the influence of technocrats like Musk and Thiel, and about what I found really interesting, I hope she will touch on it, is the algorithm for how Musk takes over a company, or in this case, a government.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Martha. I really appreciate you inviting me. Living here, I live abroad now. I live in Spain, and living overseas, it's really challenging to see everything that's happening, and you can really feel helpless in a sense. And my YouTube channel actually started as my way of giving voice to the resistance. So what I want you to take away from everything that I say is the power that you have as an individual, the things that you can do personally to affect change with the people I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Elon Musk, and I'm going to talk about his friend, Peter Thiel. They've known each other for a long time. They started PayPal together along with a few other friends, but they've all been in cahoots for a very long time. And if you remember, they both were a part of the 2016 transition team for Trump. They've been here the entire time. I don't think we all paid enough attention to it. And in his book, Peter Thiel actually wrote something that is super interesting. And I didn't understand it until I left Tesla. And what he said is the best startups might be considered slightly less extreme kinds of cults. And now that I look back at my 6 years of Tesla, 3 years of them as a store leader in that position, I understand completely what it means. And let me get you to how I understood that. After leaving, I could look back and see that point where I was faced with a promotion. The promotion was to become a store leader, but I had to commute five hours each day. So driving to work 2.5 hours, driving home 2.5 hours. It was either take that role or lose my job. Clearly, I took the role and I stayed in the position for 3 years. During that time as a store leader, I implemented and took pay cuts for the health of the company, a company that constantly exceeded revenue goals year after year, quarter over quarter. I normalized what a 70-hour work week looks like. Tesla, working in it, it is a bit of a cult. You don't realize while you're there, but once you leave, it becomes really, really clear. Elon, he was very much our visionary. And he did everything through something called first principles thinking. You want to break everything down to its very core and remove what doesn't need to be there so that you can fix the problem. So he calls it his algorithm. There's 5 steps to it. You want to question everything. You'll delete as much as possible. You're going to simplify and optimize. You'll accelerate the timeline, and then you're going to automate once everything is done. So to help you understand it a bit more, I'm going to talk about it in terms of cars, because I think most of us have had access to purchasing a car. So when you bought a Tesla before 2018, you had the traditional experience. You would come into the store, you would sit down, you would sign paperwork, you'd be introduced to your car. And because the car was so different, you'd have an in-person orientation. So that experience took between an hour and 2 hours, depending on your need level. Deliveries now, well, that was a problem. It took too long. We were ramping up for Model 3. We had too many cars going through and not enough facilities to execute the amount of cars that were going out. So we had to ask these questions, question the requirement. And we had to know, does someone have to hand off the keys to the vehicle? Does the delivery experience have to be aesthetically pleasing? Does anyone actually have to see the buyer ever? Because you can order your car online. Do we actually have to see you? The next step was to delete as much as possible. So that begs another question. Can we? Can we delete the need for physical paper in most states? Can we eliminate the person that guides you through your vehicle orientation? Can we eliminate your need to actually physically come inside the building? And if you've taken delivery of a Tesla anytime since 2019, you know that answer is no for all of them. You're signing your paperwork in your phone. You're doing your vehicle orientation in your phone. And if you didn't take the time to do it in your phone, you'll do it in your car. Do you need to come inside the building? No, because once your car is ready, you get a text notification and it tells you where your car is. You go hop inside. Your tag is already on the back of the car and you accept delivery on your phone. You never need to see a human being. Then you have to simplify and optimize. They got rid of the need for temporary tags. They eliminated the need for specific appointment times because as soon as your car was prepared, you got a text notification that your car was ready. Even if it was outside of your appointment time, you can come in early and pick up your car, and we will never know that you were here, and you never have to see a person. And then step 4, accelerate the cycle time. You got to do this. You don't try it. You change appointments from 1 hour to 10-minute blocks. You can't see your car until you accept delivery. So that moves people through their appointments. No more inspecting your cars. You're not going to see your car until you accept your car. And then we'll give you 100 miles to figure out if there's anything you don't like about it, and then we'll fix it. And then step 5, we automate, and everything goes to code. So once the vehicle is staged, you get that notification to come get your vehicle. Your document signing, it's all in the phone. It's self-guided. Your vehicle orientation, it's all been self-guided. So we've eliminated all the people from it. So what you felt with Doge Everyone who's worked at Tesla has felt it in multiple ways. They've eliminated many processes. They've eliminated many people with those processes to come to automation. And that's what you're feeling now with Doge. The algorithm with Doge, all parts of our government have been questioned. Many parts have experienced deletions. It wasn't a mistake. He understands the importance of Noah. He wants to get rid of everything so he can replace it. It's a rebuilding. It's not, his goal is to recreate the wheel. He never just smooths out the bumps. It's always a recreation, right? Because we're doing first principles thinkings. We want to get to everything at its core. And if you're not replacing things that you've deleted, then you haven't deleted enough things. So now we're in the time of things being simplified and optimized. Yes, he's not in Doge right now, but his people are there. Peter Thiel still has influence in Doge as well. So if you look within this administration, you'll see that it has a deep influence with the PayPal mafia. All the gentlemen involved in the PayPal mafia, they have their fingers in this pot in some way. So I need us all to pay attention to that, because our power with them is understanding where their money comes from and removing their access to our money. Because the main thing with these tech billionaires is they siphon money from your community and they put it into their pockets. They want your money. Your community doesn't get your money. Every time you use their product, their service, you're giving them their money and more power. And the last thing that they want from us is control. And that's what they're doing in our government right now. So I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. That's something that Peter Thiel has said. He is deeply involved in our government. He is the founder of Palantir. Palantir is the company that has a lot of governmental contracts. Think Department of Defense, think Health and Human Services, think Homeland Security. And at this moment, they're trying to consolidate all of our information, and proposed future contracts for him are IRS and the Social Security Administration. So I want you to think about what a future would look like. Let's say you're driving your car along, you have a tail light out and you get pulled over. And now that officer has every bit of information on you because Palantir has all of your information. So in the end, I want you to be very mindful. All of my YouTube videos talk about this. We have to be mindful with where we spend our money, because we don't want our money to go to a man who says the extension of the franchise of women have rendered the notion of a capitalist democracy into an oxymoron. Thank you, everyone, for having me. And I hope you're able to take away that we spend our money wisely and we try and keep it within our communities and not send it to these techs. I know that convenience makes life easy, but at this time, it's an act of resistance to keep your money within your community, even if it costs more.
Thank you, Kina. Thank you very much. So our last speaker is Jim Bertel. Jim is a longtime environmental activist, and by that I mean decades. Jim is responsible for the preservation of a lot of the old growth forest in Oregon. That forest, of course, is being threatened again. So Jim has decades of experience as a grassroots activist and empowering individuals and organizing groups. So he's going to talk about that.
That last presentation was really interesting. I was very impressed. Well, my background, I'm a senior federal manager, retired, went to Oregon to study classical music, And where I got my drinking water, there was all old growth all around the area that I lived, hundreds of thousands of untouched old growth forests that I learned were ready to be clear cut. There were about 100 clear cuts planned for the area. And where I used to get my spring in the water from a spring in the mountains, one day I went to get it, was all flagged with little, flagged. And that was going to be the site where they're going to park the trucks to take all the trees out for this whole area of old growth. And beginning with that day, I became an ancient forest activist, and then I became one of the leaders in the Pacific Northwest, all volunteers mostly. And in my area, we had 100 of these clear cuts of old growth planned, and they all got stopped, and the trees are still there. At the same time, I also was the chair of the Democratic Party for my county and managed campaigns at all local levels and then I came back to New York State and I was really concerned about one issue with the way we stopped the old growth logging, which was it was stopped by regulation and presidential proclamation and Forest Service procedure changes, and we dropped the clear cuts of those forests by 90%, and they're still down 90%. But I did not think that that campaign was a success because we never got permanent protection for that. In other words, there was no legislation to protect it. And so while a lot of people were very happy, and of course the trees are still there, I began a research for several years of the history of all the United States political campaigns that created permanent protection and the ones that created temporary protection, and at the national level, which campaigns were successful and people still support, and which campaigns were successful and then reversed. In other words, of all the American movements, of which this is a movement, against what seemed to be implacable odds, and everybody I talk to think that the odds are impossible. But I've been studying about campaigns where the odds are really a lot worse than ours, if you can believe that. Like, and the best example I give a lot of examples, but one example is Social Security. Colonel Townsend was a doctor and retired and had been fired as a doctor during the Depression. And looked out his window at an old woman, getting garbage out of a garbage can to eat. And he started the Townsend movement to create basically the Social Security system. Now he had no experience in politics or motivation or public speaking or anything. He just wrote a letter to the editor about this problem. And within 2 years, there were 7,000 Townsend clubs in the United States with 5 to 10 million members that paid 25 cents. Back then, that was a lot of money during the Depression. Yet, and they signed a petition with 12 million signatures. And they began to have hearings. He had a proposal, so many dollars a month that you had to spend by the end of the altogether. But they had hearings. Now, everybody was opposed, all the social scientists, all the political analysts, all the economists, the entire Senate, House, totally opposed. And within 3 years, we had Social Security legislation for America. And everybody loves it. We still like Social Security, and you see the current. But now that was typical of the way other things happened. Like when Martin Luther, when we wanted to have civil rights and voting for Black people, and after the Civil War, we passed 2 constitutional amendments to give Black people in Mississippi, Alabama, the right to vote. And for the next 100 years, Black people didn't vote. Why? Because even though you had something in the law that people didn't buy it, didn't understand it, they didn't agree with it. And so I was looking at what prohibition was successful for a couple of years, but people never got the idea that they shouldn't drink. In other words, the idea that you shouldn't drink was never in the American mind, and so it was later totally reversed. The same thing with clean water. The way the Clean Water Acts were passed was the Earth Day. There were 12 million people. It made such a commotion that Nixon put all the clean water, clean air, all those into law. Now, today, you couldn't take a bucket of paint and dump it in a stream to protest that law. No, I mean, people think you're nuts. Okay. But as far as wilderness, when we set up our wildernesses, it was by voting, but it was never in the American people's minds that wilderness is inviolate. And so you can have demonstrations where people take motorized vehicles and drive them into wilderness areas with American flags. And the latest one, the guy who did that went from county commissioner to high up lieutenant governor running for governor. So certain ideas from social movements get deeply embedded, like the idea that women should vote, like my next speaker, that's not going to be changed because that's in the American soul. And it was put there by 10,000 activists over a long period of time. So it's not appropriate to be discouraged now in terms of the serious problem that we have. Because in the past, the problems were even more insurmountable. So I analyzed what these successful campaigns that put change deep in the heart of America, what they had in common. And the common elements are, one of them is they weren't run by professionals at all. And even the ancient force campaign they were run by volunteers. And they weren't funded by foundations. They were funded by benefactors. So if you want to make a successful movement, you better run it with volunteers like Townsend, me, just people. And you better fund it with people who want to give you money because they think you're doing something useful. And if you do something useful, to come back a year later and give you more. Not a foundation that wants you to have deliverables, right? No. Good campaigns don't have deliverables. They just have hardworking people. The other thing is that the organizing is at the sub-precinct level. All the great campaigns that permanently change things are at there's 180,000 electoral precincts in the United States. And that's the level that you guys are all organizing in. And that's the level where you're on the right track, because the bad guys are all organizing at the Bannons and the Bundys are making amazing progress at the precinct level. Precinct organizers taking a whole political parties in some states through absorbing and taking over the precinct process in the Republican Party. So good campaigns are organizing at the county and below level. The other thing is all successful campaigns use cutting edge technology. From the first really good organized campaign for the environment was at Lake George, to save Lake George, by a guy named Apperson. And did this in the 1920s and 30s. And he used the first black and white portable camera that was ever used. He got it right from the factory where they made it. And he made documentaries as to what was involved. He used the first color black and white camera. The second big campaign was to save the Adirondacks itself. And it relied on the very first portable color cameras to create documentaries. This campaign is going to run on AI. You're going to see it it's showing up in campaigns already. And so we want to have a sub part of this movement that is at the bleeding edge and beyond what's useful. And that's what the bad guys have done. In the beginning, in the political campaigns around 2016, they were using technology that the Democrats still don't even understand how it works. They're a couple of generations ahead. The innovative technology is going on in the hard right. The bowels of the hard right systems are developing amazing, powerful systems. And we have to keep up with that. So you're on the right track. And you're just a couple steps and iterations away from that 10 million mass that you need. And so all the elements are here. And there's no reason to be discouraged. If you want to lose your discouragement, just read the history of suffrage, history of civil rights, the unfortunate history of prohibition, and it'll really cheer you up. So this is a wonderful opportunity, and I appreciate the ability to talk to you and that I've been asked. And they're still cutting those old growth trees in the United States, and they're going to cut more of them unless we get off our ass. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. So I think we've had an arc of a story here, and I hope that people have questions. It looks like there are some there. Kate, would you like to ask some of those questions?
Hi there. So we have some great questions in the Q&A, and just housekeeping, you can ask them at the bottom menu and click the More button if you need to find it. And there was one that I think we'll jump back to our first presenter, Dave, who would like to answer this one. So this question is to you, Dave. How do we argue against those Trump supporters that say his administration is just doing what needs to be done to root out the buried corruption in our system? They seem to get defensive and shut down useful conversation when you try to draw useful comparisons to Putin and other figures. So Dave, off to you.
Yeah, so I think first it's important to understand that a lot of what drives Trumpism is really about social connection and belonging. And people who have been feeling left out, marginalized, ridiculed, otherwise sort of, set aside by the political process, feel as though their group is finally getting a chance to maybe even the score, but it might be even less than that. Just, being in control, and the narratives that they've shared among themselves are that there is all this corruption, and that there's all these deeply corrupt practices that have been going on, and that we're finally rooting that stuff out. Now, that's not really true, but that doesn't mean that they don't think that. And the reasons that they think that are because of these group membership things. So I'm pretty good friends with a guy named Steve Hassan, who is one of the leading experts on cults. And I think it's reasonable to think about the Trump phenomenon in terms of cult dynamics. I don't know that everybody that's participating, should be considered a cult member, but it does have those same kinds of social dynamics. And what he stresses in talking with people that have been sort of radicalized past the event horizon into cultish groups is that, you're not really going to convince them with facts. And in fact, it may not even be productive to try to sort of argue with them. I think, you can respectfully state the facts and let that sit with them and wait for them to reach that conclusion at some point on their own. Because typically what happens with these kinds of, cultish groups is that at some point people begin to see the light, and they see that, the leader has been lying. And I know that it's impossible to believe that that's true in this current situation, because it just seems like the fever will never break. But in fact, that does ultimately usually happen, and people have some kind of rethinking of this. And what's important is to maintain a social connection with them, so that when they finally start to steer away from this a little bit, you haven't cut ties with them. So a lot of people say, well, cut all toxic people out of your life. I'm not convinced that's the right answer based on those dynamics. I think the better answer is to try to maintain ties with people who, maybe are becoming more extreme, such that when the fever breaks, there's an opportunity to kind of bring them back into your life, and really to normalize their social relationships so that they maybe see things in a little bit more balanced way. It can be condescending to talk to people about this way, because people feel like that we're talking down to them or something. And I think it's important to respect people when you're doing this, because again, hating on them and vilifying them and everything else just generally tends to radicalize people more. So part of the process with this is to kind of just wait it out, but to stand firm for what you believe while also being respectful and keeping social ties alive.
Such good advice. Okay, now this question goes to Olga. This was an early question from Faith. From Minneapolis here, assassination of state rep this morning and shooter at large caused our Department of Public Safety to tell people not to go to the No Kings rallies. Is this going to be a new technique to suppress dissent?
I do believe that there will be false flags, but again, I think that we can't, because they're going to use fear as a main way to try to silence dissent on top of their other visual tactics of having Marines deployed, a National Guard. I think that as long as we dissent in a smart way, because the most important is to participate in protest and be very peaceful. And it's not just protest. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do, you know, to push back, organize, calling your Congress members. It actually has worked on some issues that I've organized people on. But as long as you use smart tactics when you do protest, you know, go in groups, make sure there's nothing violent. If you suspect someone in the crowd as an antagonist, step away from that, you know, separate yourself from them. I think we'll be fine.
Thanks. And a follow-up. This is a question from Andy relating to your presentation. What is the status of the illegal firings of the inspectors generals, such a key guardrail?
At the moment, it is making its way up through the courts, and ultimately the decision is going to be to the Supreme Court. I track all these events to look for patterns and, you know, make sure to update on the latest. And the last I checked, I mean, they're going to try to push it to the Supreme Court to see the legality of firing these inspectors general.
Thank you. This question is for Kina. What main products other than PayPal do you recommend people stop using?
It's abundant. You actually need to look at what you're using and audit who actually owns it. So I can go to Google right now and see the companies that Peter Thiel has investment in, and I'm going to do that right now. So we're looking at companies such as PayPal, Facebook, Palantir, of course, we have no access to. Let's see, he owns a company that gives money to people to not go to college because he actually doesn't believe in education, even though he is Stanford educated. That fund is called Founders Fund, and you can find a listing of companies there. He also has another fund where he donates to people. I have a list, it's on my last video. I'm not Googling very quickly right now. But what I do recommend is everything you use, when you're about to use something, actually take a moment, just pause, have a look at it and see if it's funded by someone who is working against you. Now, I know that causes some trouble in this world that we live in because companies such as Substack and YouTube. YouTube is a platform I post on. A lot of these are controlled by those people. Now, I do make the exception for YouTube, but I am off other platforms as well. So you just have to be mindful with how you use things. I spent a year weaning myself off of Amazon because they weren't doing what I need them to do. I don't buy Teslas anymore. I've had 3. Now I drive a Volvo. So you just take little peeks at your life, and pretty much if it makes your life convenient, they're probably involved in it. But if you take a look at the things you use, take a pause, Google, see who owns it, you'll find out the companies that you'll want to stay away from. And if you just go online and pull up the PayPal Mafia, you'll have a whole list of names and companies that you can stay away from. I hope that helped.
I wanted to add to that to pay special attention to Andreessen Horowitz and specifically Mark Andreessen and stuff that and they are up in, and that does include Substack. And I know that there's a lot of people that are productively using Substack right now. I did write a piece about the structural issues with Substack that I posted in the chat, but I can post it again if folks would like to see that. But the main issue with Substack is it's very difficult for the people that are already on there to leave now because it's a bit of a project. It's not impossible, it's just work. But I would advise if you are thinking about starting a newsletter like that or trying to monetize content, I would say avoid Substack because their intent is to actually replace all other media with Substack. And they have an express vision of including that in the network state model, which is being driven by the neo-reactionary folks like Curtis Yarvin and Teal and the rest of them. So yeah, Substack considered harmful. Definitely try. Everybody should be trying to get off of Substacks however they can, whenever they can, with the recognition that that's not easy.
Thanks,
I was
Olga.
able to find a quick list. I apologize. OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, Stripe, SpaceX, Figma, Facebook, Airbnb, Spotify, Affirm. So try and use credit less and use cash because frankly, these guys actually want you to convert to crypto because they want to regulate and they don't want to use the US dollar anymore. So every little thing adds up to be, once we add all our droplets together, we've made a river, and then one day it'll be an ocean.
I just want to add to that. Also like doing the Tesla thing and coordinating because I work with Europe on many intelligence and defense issues. And there was the boycott across Europe for Tesla. And I think, we have a lot of partners because we often look at, the resistance being in US where there are literally every country in Europe is going through the same thing of trying to push back the far right. Coordinating with them and doing, global boycotts against recognizable brands, I think is also important. And I mean, in Germany, the sales, I believe February or March fell down by like 75% on Tesla. And that really, really hits, the shareholders and the company.
Thank you all. Okay, this question is for Jim. It was a question from Corin. Young people don't seem engaged. Any advice? I see it with my recent granddaughter and high school graduate.
Well, I think young people want something to do, and they want to be involved and they want to be active. And if you want to have somebody that wants to you want to get somebody to change the world, have a cleanup day in your neighborhood and invite all the kids, and they'll be the most active ones. That we do this every year, and with trash bags and all that kind of get together, and all the kids come, and then have things for them to do, like noxious weeds. They're invasive all over the place. Get them out with clippers and stuff like that. So the number in my environmental group that I've always been involved in Oregon, each month they put out a list of activities. I mean, all kinds of things. In other words, if you get people watching birds, if you get people doing recycling, if you get people doing things to help their community and their neighbors and stuff like that, they all want to do that. And then they're out of bed. In other words, the thing is not to turn somebody into an activist, it's to make them involved with their life and their neighborhood and their neighbors and to get out of bed. In other words, like you want to get them out of bed to be doing something, okay? And then when they're doing something, you can do some other something. And eventually they become, an international environmentalist or something like that. But you can't go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in one step. But kids want to be involved. I mean, like I got a great big yard, and I've had several occasions where neighbor kids go, can I come over? Can I work with, they want to work with me in my yard. They like to work with adults. Young boys like to work with, older men as role models, So get them started. Go and ask them what they're interested in doing. Go to the high school, to the environmental event. Say, what do you want to do? What could we help you? In other words, could we buy the bags? Could we arrange the pickups? Could we give you the shears so you could go after the invasive plants that are growing all around my high school over here? So get them involved in anything and then use that. But to start with the simplest steps and make it all fun and interesting and what they want to do, not what you want to do.
Great. And then a follow-up to the larger context you were talking about. This is a question for you, Jim, from an anonymous participant. I was wondering if you can expand on your assertion that the left needs to utilize AI. What would be an effective way to do that? And how can we minimize the environmental impact of AI and other technologies? And then open it up to the other panelists.
I was working with a campaign, and in campaigns in the past, we've done sign-on letters from, say, 20 or 40 groups. With AI, you could identify, like, let's say you're working on a clean water or pollution issue, landfill issue, something like that, or forests. There are Eastern national forests too. Now nobody pays any attention to these anymore. Nobody pays attention to anybody that they say about anything, and pretty soon you won't even be able to get standing or enough time to file appeals to know what's the bad things that are going on, because you won't even know the bad things that are going on in the first place, because they no longer have to tell you. And plus, all the reasons that you stop things from happening are no longer bad. So that's for starters. Okay. Well, in about 12 minutes, I got a list of all of the groups in that state who would have an interest in this particular environmental issue. Because the people that want to save trees are not just the people that are in Save the Trees group or Friends of the such and such river. They also are all the gardening groups. You know how many gardening groups there are in the state? A lot of them. Okay. And so if you use the queries in AI, you can come up with a list of 500 groups that would potentially be interested in what you're doing. And you could get a sign-on letter of 500 groups in a state, and that will get somebody's attention. Now, that's one of like 100 different things you could do. You could take technical papers that you cannot understand what they say and turning them into a child's textbook at the 8th grade level. Oh, let's make it 10th grade. No, drop it to 5th grade with more illustrations. And you could do that in like a half an hour. So AI is like having like the smartest person you ever knew with the most infinite amount of information at their fingertips, willing to help you 24 hours a day to do anything in 3 seconds. That's about how it works. Now, people say, oh, it doesn't work, it makes a lot of mistakes and blah, blah, blah. No, it does, but not if you're careful, and not if you work at it, not if you practice. If you take the work that came out of one AI, give it to another one, say, where are the mistakes? Okay? Or you proofread this and see, in other words, you can use 2 or 3 or 4 AIs to go back and forth with each other. But it's hard to sell AI because everybody knows it doesn't work, it makes mistakes and stuff like that, and they don't know anything about it. And now I have a reason to never know anything about it because it's totally stupid and wrong. But the bad guys are using AI, and they've been using it for a long time in a very powerful way, and we're going to use it better than they do, and we better, because a good activist could stop 300 bad guys before. Now we're going to have to stop 3,000. Okay, so you can do things. You can write a white paper in 1 second. You can do a press release in 1 second. I mean, a lot of people are not going to buy it, probably 95%. But if there's like 2 activists out there that hear what I'm saying, believe me, you can multiply yourself like by infinity if you're sharp enough, if you work hard enough. So I was told not to give that spiel in this talk. I can't help it. That's my answer.
So let me just interrupt here for a moment. We've had some people requesting where the speakers can be where you can access the speakers. So if each of the speakers could put the link that you want people to have in the chat bot, I'd really appreciate it. It's going out to everybody that that signed up for this event, but I think we have people on here that just kind of wandered in. So if you could each give them a link to where they can find you, I'd appreciate that.
Are we ready for more questions?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry about that.
Thank you for the housekeeping. Perfect. So there's a great general question that I think I'm curious about all of our speakers, how you would answer this. This question is for Milani. Please name 10 ongoing things that we can do to make a difference.
Well, I can answer that. I would say the whole climate of the country is being driven by this hate radio process. Hate radio is always local, and it always has part of its advertising for local advertisers. That's what pays for hate radio in your neighborhood. Then the national people have advertising. Now, who advertises on hate radio? It's your local car dealers and stuff like that. So if like 10 people, I mean, if the people in each community, if you're plagued by hate radio, and almost the whole US is, listen to who sponsors it when they do the local, and then call them and say, hey, you know what you're doing to our community with all this hate speech? So hate radio and MAGA and the whole architecture of the crazy Republican nuts is being financed by you. Every time you go buy a car or go buy tires or something like that from stores that advertise. If they didn't advertise, zero hate radio, it would all disappear. So the interesting thing about the biggest problem of this whole is that all the progressives and liberals and Democrats are actually paying half the freight for all the financialization of the political process that Newt Gingrich invented in the 1990s. And we've been paying for it ever since, because we wouldn't want to turn on hate radio and listen to those awful people, because we wouldn't stoop to their level. Well, you're going to have to stoop to their level to see who's paying for all that poison in your neighborhood. That's one thing you can do. So the other 9 are not important from my point of view.
I'm sorry, the question was what we can do, what everyone can do, because I missed half of it. Martha? Oh. Anyway,
So-
I'll give that, huh?
Yes.
Okay, so this is very important, and I see a lot of people, who really get overwhelmed. And like Dave said, I mean, we're in this for the long haul. This is not an easy fix. So the most important thing is to be active. It doesn't matter what you do. You don't have to say, I will take down, this far right movement and bring back, a stable democracy in America, but you have to continue being active. And it could be anything, whatever your focus is on. That's what you put your attention to. Unite with other people, build coalitions. Like I said, I mean, we're all in this together in America. In Europe, the same thing is happening, creating a global coalition. Like today, No King's Day, we have protests thousands across America, and at the same time our European allies are in solidarity marching with us. The second thing is not to lose focus, because what dictators want to do is they want to flood the zone, overwhelm you, and get you to a point that you feel that no matter what I do, it doesn't matter because it's not going to change anything. So always keep your focus. Don't doom scroll. because a lot of the activity online is usually, intelligence operations from foreign countries and influencers who have a stake in what is happening. So avoid doom scrolling and just be focused. And if you need to take a break, make sure to have your mental health day or two and then get back into it when you can. But as long as you're active and doing something, whether it's calling Congress, whether it's emailing, Congress 5 times a day, whether it's going to your local indivisible meetings, connecting to other indivisible organizations across the country, pushing back against the civil rights rollback. I mean, civil rights right now is under such attack. Whatever your passion is, that's where you put your channel, your energy, and just keep pushing towards contributing to that.
Does any other panelists have something else to add, Dave?
Yeah, so most of my presentation was really kind of focused on those kinds of 10 things. But besides that, I also linked to an article from that slide that I posted in the chat also that has 7 specific things that folks can do. And it's sort of recapping some of the things that I also talked about in my little talk. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest sort of mindset change that I think people maybe could benefit from is the idea that this is very much a marathon and not a sprint. There are a lot of near-term important tactical things that need to be done. We need to figure out what's going to happen in 2026 with the midterms and, ideally win a bunch of elections then, assuming we have elections, which is the other problem. We need to ensure that we have elections that matter, and that's going to take a lot of short-term organizing. But even past that, and that's coming up in 18 months or whatever, we have a ton of other stuff that's going to need to be addressed beyond that. So just kind of getting into a, long-term warrior mode is probably the thing that folks could most benefit from, and give you the resilience and strength you need to kind of persist through all of this.
And is that also your answer to the question about what do you say to people in your circle that say there's nothing I can do about it and they're the sit back and watch attitude? Is that you have more to expand upon that?
Yeah, I mean, so in the article that I linked to, it's called "What to Do When There Is Nothing to Be Done," and I wrote that really because a lot of people were asking me. I feel like there's nothing I can do, and to some extent, you sort of have to go. Well, I agree with you. There isn't much we can do. However, there are a bunch of things that we can do at the local level, and with ourselves. And I think it does start within us. So that article, outlines a lot of that. But I think it's important to differentiate between the kinds of cliched answers that we often get in political contexts where people say, volunteer, phone bank, canvas, donate, all of those kinds of things that are obvious and which people did at scale in 2024 and it didn't work out, and so people are feeling hopeless and like, how do we respond when things like that don't work? And I would argue that to some extent, it's because those things were attacking a layer of the problem, which isn't really where the war was being fought, which was at the cultural level. So what we're basically going to be faced with is rebuilding the culture. And that's going to take some time, and it's going to take everybody participating from the ground up, with some clever top-down organizing mixed in as well. But it's not going to come from some magical source. It's going to come from all of us standing for something. So, there's a bunch of suggestions in there about how to go about effecting that kind of an outcome. And also, there's a list of additional resources in that article that link to a bunch of smart authors who have each identified their own strategies for kind of managing these kinds of, creating change from the bottom up. And some of the articles in there are really excellent. So I'd recommend checking out all of the references in that article. But I think there's a lot of things to be done once you kind of open your mind to the idea that, it really starts with us and there's things that we can do at the local level and it's going to take a while.
Great. And another follow-up for you, Dave. You talked about the importance of, primary sources. And there's a question asking, okay, so if not mainstream media, what other media organizations do you recommend for balanced and fair news reporting today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I generally rely mostly on C-SPAN myself, and that's because I am getting access most of the time to primary sources. I like to hear what's being said in Congress rather than reporting about what's being said in Congress. I like to hear, events and other kinds of live streams directly. I find that media is all over the map, and it all depends on the points of view of reporters. So you may find that there's certain reporters that you really like. I tend to trust, people that tend to do a lot of kind of firsthand investigation into things. So, people like Julia Davis, who monitors Russian media. I look at her stuff all the time. I look at people like Catherine Belton and Michael Weiss, Christo Grozev. Like there's just a lot of people that are actually digging into real stuff and looking at real documents and reporting that out, and that kind of stuff tends to be the most reliable from my perspective. Just my personal experience is if I turn on CNN or NPR or any of the sort of mainstream channels, I find that I respond to the emotional attacks that are baked into a lot of the reporting, especially on cable television news. And I resent those emotional cues that are baked into it. And I also find, even with stuff like NPR, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance where narratives are being overlaid onto facts that I know are incomplete or perhaps, well-meaning but misinformed, and it just kind of drives me nuts. So rather than experience that cognitive dissonance and the kind of pain that comes with it, I just opt instead. I think a lot of people opt out. I don't think that's the right answer, but I do think that leaning more towards primary sources and people directly investigating primary sources is probably the way to go, because that puts you in a position then of some agency where you can actually evaluate stuff, kind of take it on your own terms and think about it. And, it does require more burden because it means you're doing that evaluation, which means you need to do a lot of reading and study and know what you're talking about. But, I think if you really want to go down the road of trying to be informed, that's, I think, kind of a necessary step. And again, it doesn't mean don't listen to anything else, but just be critical, even within the context of something like the New York Times, which is generally reliable, but then they have a lot of crazy nonsense in there too. So you have to just kind of be a informed and careful consumer of media.
Thank
Um,
you.
I
Oh,
have I have a comment to make on that. Um, Fascists have always put their plans out in public because they say that nice people, progressive people, thoughtful, reasonable people won't read it. They never will, because they don't want to stoop to that level of exposing themselves. But if you listen to hate radio and if you read what the other side, on the other side, like 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, they put out all their plans for what they're doing right now. And I wrote a blog post about what they're going to be doing right now 18 months ago, because they laid it all out in that 1,000-page document of what every single agency was going to be doing to us and how they were going to do it. And I said, these are professionals. I was a professional federal manager at a very high level, and I know skilled staff work. That's what it was. That's what it is. These people are pros, and they'll lay it all out for you. And so the first thing you're going to do if you're going to advocate for something, be an expert in the other side's ideas and plans and notions and rationales and science, so you know it better than they do when you go to a meeting, so you're better prepared. Most of the time, our side's not even prepared because they never read what those other people are doing, because that's awful. Okay, so make sure your reading sources include all of the deep bad guys' best stuff. You want to know how to organize a political campaign, go see what Bundy did in Idaho with his plans and how he organizes his whole organization. Is a genius. We never ever did anything like that. So to stay ahead, but Hitler said in Mein Kampf, in his Bible he said, don't worry about putting all your fascist plans out in public, because the people will never believe you lied, no matter what you do. Now, so he's laid out all the rules for how you do this stuff. So don't just read left-wing stuff. Mostly read the bad guy stuff if you're going to be fighting with them, because you're going to have to know what they're saying and thinking and doing better than they do, and be able to even articulate it better than they do. That's what a good lawyer does. A good lawyer knows your side better than they do, better than their own side. That's what you got. And that's what's really missing. We don't want to listen to those people. We only want to listen to nice people that we agree with. But if you're going to win fights, political wars, you better be prepared on the other sides. All their basic arguments, the secondary and the tertiary arguments that they're telling their supporters. So in terms of media, have it be really wide.
I just wanted to add to that and say that, yeah, Jim is absolutely correct about that. And one of the tactics that I've been using the last several years is actually to attend various kinds of right-wing and Russia-linked events in order to understand how they're seeing the problems and how they speak to each other. As a middle-aged white guy, I tend to fit in perfectly, so it's no problem for me to blend in at these things. And you'll never hear more clearly what they're intending to do and what their thought process is than by actually showing up at what they're doing and talking to each other. So one of the things that I've noticed is that there's this kind of Duganist network attached to the Schiller Institute, which is the LaRouche people, and they're all up in all kinds of different information operations, and we'll get into more detail on that later. But it's like you can't learn that stuff unless you show up. And like Jim said, there's a lot of ways to pay attention to what they're saying online and to monitor that. And being a good student of that, those kinds of primary sources is as important as anything else, on the left.
Okay, so we're actually getting close to the end. Well, I wanted to say Kina I'm sure has something to add to this discussion we've been having. So I wanted to give her the last word here. I get the last word, but I wanted to give her the next to the last word because we are coming up on the ending time for this.
Just so you understand, it's not just Project 2025 that we're looking at. We're also looking at the Dark Enlightenment movement, where the technocrats, that's where they live. And you'll see that there's lots of parallels between Project 2025 and the Dark Enlightenment movement with regards to women. And the most compelling bit of information for me is they don't want us to vote. They want us to live in a state that they own. Just imagine a bunch of company towns across the US, and your only power is your power to leave the company town. That's all you get. And I also want you to consider that one of Peter Thiel's companies that he has, it works on magic mushrooms, and it fought for FDA approval for ketamine. And it just kind of gives you that connection with the use of ketamine within these tech bros and their behaviors. So they're all in line with Peter. He is the leader in the group. So we don't want to just focus on Elon. We want to make sure that we're looking at the entire PayPal mafia, where Peter is the Don of the mafia. So just pay attention. Our money is our power. And frankly, that's all they want. They want power, they want money, they want control. And the one thing that we can influence right now, immediately in our everyday life and feel good about it, is controlling where we put our money so that they don't siphon more away from us and we all don't end up in company towns. And I did see the comment from whoever said they don't agree with me moving to Spain. I moved in 2022 because the cost of living here is far more affordable. I own a house and pay $100 a year in property taxes. It's a great lifestyle I'm living now. So I'm doing all that I can from overseas, and I don't expect to come back because I think my husband would get caught up in ICE, and that's not good for him. So thank you, Martha.
So thank you, everyone. We're coming up to the end of this. People have been asking about the resources. As I said, if you registered for this talk, actually, even if you didn't make it, we will put together a sheet that will be sent out to everybody early next week with all the reference material. I know people have some, but we'll make sure that people get as much of it as possible. I want to thank our 4 speakers. This was really amazing. And since I get the last word, I wanted to give a piece of advice. And what I've seen, I have to say, I've been doing what Dave and several other people said to not do. Ever since Trump came down his golden elevator, I have been doom scrolling. And what I've observed over this time is that it's so easy to normalize, to get used to what's happening, to normalize things that aren't normal. If you look at some of Trump appointees who have taken active action against the United States, if those people came, they wouldn't be nominated to start with. And if they came up before the Senate, they would have been laughed out of the hall. And yet these people are now in important government positions. In some cases, you have Democrats who have voted for them here and there. So try to remember what life was like. I think that anytime you live in an authoritarian government, one of the things that's important is to hold a memory of what things were like before they changed. And that's the most important thing that you can act on, is to remember what things used to be like and to envision what they need to be like in the future. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. This was really wonderful, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for setting this up, Martha.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good luck in your cities today.
Yeah.